let's, I guess, parse into localism maybe versus like cosmo-localism versus global,
Yeah.
so I want to make a distinction too that someone made. A lot of people in today's world critique globalism, and rightly so, for supply chains, fragility. We saw the Suez Canal kind of stuff. But another thing I think something that people need to think about is maybe not globalism or a global is planetarity, like almost thinking at that high of level of that this is like kind of a spaceship. And I've written some things on, how that we're always, we're flying into space as an updated operating manual for Spaceship Earth, influenced by Buckminster Fuller. But like, what is that kind of difference of seeing in scales? Because you just talked about class. Well, we're on a global class, if you really want to talk about it in terms of East, West, Indigenous, in terms of the effects of climate change, economics. And so maybe let's just parse out some of those kind of differences between like thinking about the global, kind of issues, but not in a globalist way, and then thinking about localism in a way, but doesn't, personify itself only with the local, and doesn't, think about the most pressing problems that all of us are going to face now that we live in, 2021. So
yeah, that's a great question. So I again, thinking about how I've had this conversation with Joe and Jason, especially, but
Jason Snyder for everyone.
Jason Snyder, Cognosor. So basically, the way that I think about scale is, I was talking about this with Jason and Trace Crow, whose Twitter handle is Doge at Crow, the other day. Basically, my sense is that we need to focus on local practices that make sense in local contexts, but we can think about global or larger scale. It doesn't have to be global. It could be regional, statewide, nationwide, or global principles. I think principles make sense on any scale and actually can be very helpful when you're thinking on larger scales. Like, what are the principles that are guiding this? What are our values, basically?
Yes.
So, if I take a look at the way somebody's practicing small scale agriculture in England versus Uruguay versus Nigeria versus, Kentucky, there are very similar principles at play. And I think thinking about those principles that guide us and hold us together and connect our, our thriving, our simultaneous mutual thriving, can really help us to think about, like, global solidarity movements, or how can we help peasants in India and Africa and Kentucky who are all doing the same thing, guided by these principles of care for the land and care for local people and community, and et cetera. Then when you start to put those principles into practice, the way that those principles play out in practice, I think should have a scale that makes sense to whatever it is that the endeavor that you're engaged in. So Joe talks about how it doesn't always just have to be local scale, but it should be the minimum possible scale for the problem at hand. And I really like that idea. And I'm thinking back to that Miami example. Part of what was going on there is just this scale that sort of outsources responsibility and allows for corruption. It's just like, oh, someone else will take care of it, or there are these guidelines for how construction is supposed to be done, and this inspector did it and this inspector, but none of the people are talking to each other. My understanding is that had something to do with quality of concrete, and that's I didn't look into this deeply, so I might be one of those moments where I look back and say that opinion was wrong. But I read something about how there's like corruption associated with the quality of concrete, because the concrete can get cut with other materials that are cheaper, because then that increases the amount of profit and at the expense of structural quality and which integrity. Then just integrity. And so it just brings us back to this class distinction. It's just like, power, and I honestly think like these class and power dynamics are going to play out. They've played out throughout all of history. But when you get to a scale that enables global ways of doing things, a lot of things get outsourced. And so for me, the promise of localism is almost like the promise of holding others accountable and being held accountable, knowing what people are doing. It's legibility, like just even being able to understand what's going on with your neighbors. Like right now, you go to the store, you have no idea where this stuff came from, how it was processed, what's happening to the people who produced it. All of that stuff is outsourced and made to be external to our consciousness. And so to me, the scale is just so far out of whack that it's got to like go so much further in the other direction. So I tend to advocate for that. But I traveled to like 35 countries between college and grad school. I love travel. I think that it's so important to understand other people's lives and struggles and to find common ground and to see what shared principles or values we have. I think like if there were any sort of spaceship moment for me, it's that, like seeing our struggle as intertwined and similar, and that we're all kind of striving for similar not practical outcomes, but similar goals, you know, like health, safety, security, community, beauty, you know, these kinds of things. And the way that those play out are different for different cultures and individuals. But, you know, like finding the ways in which we're the same, I think is so key, while also cultivating strong local ties, which I think does sometimes mean exclusivity. You know, we're just an inclusive group. We all have this set of values. We found each other. We work together. We're committed to it. For example, it could be just a place. You know, our inclusivity is south side of Chicago, or our inclusivity is, I lived in Pullman, Washington, the Palouse. You know, we all love this bioregion. If in the parlance of a lot of the bioregionalists, you know, we love it. It's our place. We want to care for this place, and there's inclusivity in that, and that's okay. You know, I think in general we just take these really maximalist positions, like all exclusivity is bad. You know, we can't be exclusive. We have to. Everybody needs to be included all the time. Well, some kinds of exclusivity are good. They can breed a kind of pride and care. You know, so I think just having those nuanced views is so key.
Yeah, because if you lose the context, you can easily get into this like you know, chimpanzee us versus them, you know, mentality of just like warring. And it's like, it doesn't really matter about what the idea is, who the people are, where you're from. It just gets into this like eternal battle of good versus evil. And then we're back at square one.